Hello and welcome to another Daily Muppet. In today's video, we're going to talk about the words that came from Jim Ratcliffe in a big interview, first probably of many, with media, with club communications on the video, and a lot more. I think there's quite a bit to break down from this, and I want to highlight just a few of my favorite things that I saw, haven't had quite as much discussion, among a lot of the noise on Stadium and Greenwood and things like that. Talk about some of the names we might hear for summer and a little bit more. So let's get right into it. Okay, so first and foremost, obviously Sir Jim gave this big interview, spoke for quite a long time. I definitely recommend watching it. And, it's hugely refreshing, all of it, to see a person who is in control of United speaking, being forward about what they intend to do, being forthright and direct. I've said this for a long time about Sir Jim from everything that I heard. He's just a very straightforward individual. The things he says, the joke about nobody knowing whether Sheikh Jassim even exists, you wouldn't expect that to come out of someone's mouth, but that's the type of person he is. And, I know a lot of people wondered, had mentioned many times throughout the process, why haven't Ineos laid out their plans and all that? It's just not how they do things. Once they're in, then they will speak, and then they will speak, and they will tell you exactly what they're going to do. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that. If you recall, I mentioned they wanted to have it be a lot more forward-facing with people involved in the ownership group and in the management of the club, rather than the only person you ever hear from at United is the manager. And you're seeing the start of that, and you're going to see a lot more of that with Dave Brailsford, with Blanc, with Sir Jim, with Ashworth, and with others that they bring in. So let's talk about that, because obviously the sequence of actions here in terms of this season is hires, and these next three subjects kind of go in a row, and I think they're all pretty well directly hinted at and stated by Sir Jim in his interview as to the way that we're going to operate. Number one is the hires. They're pointing from a top-down situation. They have Omar Barada in there. Obviously spoke directly about Dan Ashworth and how ridiculous it would be for him to sit out a long time. He's obviously the person they're intending to bring in. There's no questions there. There's nothing hidden. There's no smoke and mirrors. Beneath that, they're looking at Jason Wilcox. I believe there were some talks over the last few days with regards to that occurring. Ineos wanting to move pretty quickly on things. The role of Jason Wilcox is expected to be a little bit of a combination of things. Number one is he will be involved in essence overseeing the coaching of the club. And we'll touch on this on the second point, but somebody who's going to look at kind of the performance of it, measuring the route that young players have into the team, making sure that what is decided upon, how it's going to be played, how things are supposed to be happening at the club in terms of style are happening at all levels, and that there's a good integration between all the groups. But that also includes a focus on an assistance in recruitment. He will have a part to play in the recruitment, in discussing players' roles, how they fit into things, where they would, how they would end up, what the kind of transitions might be, as well as, helping to look at, identify, and evaluate youth talent and things like that too. And then there's another person they're expected to be looking at that might be a little bit more of your recruitment specialist. Obviously, this is a little bit more of a centered role, who, as I think that's why Mitchell didn't want the job. I think that's why Julian Ward apparently, isn't going to be taking it, is because it's a bit of a smaller role, as you can see with Ashworth, with Wilcox, with these people, really more hands-on, identifying, recruiting players and all of that. I think it's perfect for someone like Dougie Friedman, whose job who's done a really good job at Palace and And I think it would be still a step up in import, but not, not a downgrade for him in terms of the scope of responsibility. So I think that they'll be looking for somebody there still, and that will allow them to actually move ahead on say, okay, now who are we going to get? And that goes into the second thing, which I thought was the most important thing that Sir Jim said when it comes to football. He talked about how, you want to have this decision in terms of style start at the top and all the way through a line, all the way down. Because, you know, what he said was, that you're not oscillating where you're playing Jose Mourinho, Pep Guardiola to Jose and that's what United have done, and that's been my biggest complaint when we were talking about who would replace Ole Gunnar Solskjaer a while ago. I said, I don't think there's any thought being put into this, and it was the same thing when Ole Gunnar Solskjaer was hired because I was not necessarily a fan of it for this reason back then as well, and it has nothing to do with the individuals. It's about the process. If you spend 500 million to build a Jose Mourinho type team, and then you hire a manager who's totally different and spend another 500 million, you haven't spent a billion. You spent 500 million going one way and 500 million going the other way. And you're going to be net, basically in the middle, because you've wasted the first 500, spent the second 500, you're ending up with a mess. And that's what happened between Jose to Ole to Ten Hag. It's just all over the place. And so you waste, the players that were brought in by Ole Gunnar Solskjaer are not the players that Ten Hag wants. What's the point? You wasted all that money, and then every time you're starting over. Starting over and changing managers shouldn't be this dramatic the way that it is at United. It should be, well, we'll talk about the manager at the moment. It's not, I'm not trying to make an implication there, but my point is that this point on aligning the style from top to bottom, and then you stick with that. So if anyone changes, you're not starting over. You're continuing a project. You're continuing a way of doing things. You're continuing a direction. You just say, oh, we don't have the right person to carry out that direction at any level, manager, head of recruitment, director of football, etc. And so it'll start from the top. Ineos looking at it and saying, okay, obviously in conjunction with someone like Omar Barada who knows football and Blanc, what do we want to be as United? What do we want to be? Do we want to be an ultra high possession, Arteta style team, like kind of Arsenal have been under Wenger and all of that in the past too? Do we want to be a hyper pressing team like Liverpool, like German style team? Do we want to be, or do we want to have our kind of own way of doing things that's this or that? Either way, whatever they decide, then, like he said, CEO, director of football, recruitment, and then you decide if you have a manager to carry that out or not. And that is the most important thing that they decide upon that, because it's going to say who are the players we have that fit it, who are the players that don't. Those are the ones who are going to go. We're going to recruit only players that fit this style. Has nothing to do with the manager, has nothing to do with coaching staff. It's all in alignment with this direction, with this way that we're doing things. And that is how you don't oscillate. Because let's say they decide to keep Ten Hag, and I say, we've got a style we think Ten Hag is the right man to carry it out. And they recruit down that line. Well, if it doesn't work and you sack him in a year, you're not starting over. You're still having recruitment for the same style of players, the same style of team, and the next manager comes in with a better team. And they continue it instead of starting it over. And that is, I think, the reason why it takes 3 years and people make such a huge deal about managers is, if Liverpool, for example, with Klopp leaving, appoint somebody who's in a similar style moving forward, who can do a similar thing, and they keep recruiting in a similar vein, I don't think they're going to see this big rehash. They won't. And it's because they will have continued a project, and the mistake they'll make is if they abandon that. And that'll go for City as well one day when Pep Guardiola leaves. If they do not replace him with somebody similar in style and keep that same style, then they'll end up having to redo their whole squad for the future, and it'll take 3 years. It shouldn't take that long. Um, and that I think is the key for United, is that uh, getting that style right, getting it to be the right thing, and sticking with it no matter what, and making sure, do we have the right people for it? And that's what the manager thing is going to be based on. When I've said in the past that, people said, well, if Ten Hag gets top four, or gets Champions League, will he stay? That's not really the point. It isn't. And if you listen to what Sir Jim said, it's not the point at all. They want to do the best people for the best positions for everything that they do. That's what he said, right? Best in class. And what he said specifically on this was deciding on that style, working our way down, and then do we have a manager to carry it out, etc. If they decide that Ten Hag is the right guy to fit the style that they want to play, then he will stay. If they decide that Ten Hag isn't the right guy to fit the style that they want, then he won't stay. It's not about results necessarily. And so I think people are debating the wrong things on all of this, because it isn't the point. That's why I've said I wouldn't view it as a sacking or staying. I would view it as, is he going to be the right guy for the job? So is he being hired in summer? Because if he is, he'd probably get a new contract. So consider it more like, is he being hired or is he not being hired for the job come summer? And that's more the way that I would view the manager. And if not, then who would it be? Someone like Ruben Amorim is still here, is somebody that could be interesting if they decided that, they, on the style, that Ten Hag wasn't the right person and they were looking for other options. So we will see about all of that. But that is, to me, long term, more important than anything else that has been said in terms of football. They decide on this way of playing from top to bottom, and then the manager decision is not based on arbitrary factors like, top four or not top four, because frankly, that those are a bit arbitrary. The goal is to win the league, is to win Champions League, but you're not going to get there based on heroic efforts. And I said the same thing about Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, and I said the same thing about Jose Mourinho. Pick a way you want to go, and then build with it, and then they have to get the best results with it, and that's that. So we'll see. I don't think it's particularly worth debating until they bring in these people that they want to bring in, and that remains the situation as I understand it. They don't want to disrupt the season. They're working on bringing in these directors and people. They're going to make some final decisions, start on really, recruitment and looking into things, and then saying, good, what are the players we want? Do we have the manager we need for this? And I think once those people are in, then things will start to move forward a little more clear and be stated ahead of summer. What is the plan for summer, and what is the plan for next season? That'll include names and recruitment that I'll get that will start to narrow down and solidify instead of being very broad. And it'll probably include some understanding of what's happening with the manager. If it's to be Ten Hag, then he probably gets a contract. If it's not going to be Ten Hag, then he probably won't. Well, he definitely won't if it's not. So let's move on to that, because let's talk about some of the areas there. There's already been a lot of work being done, and obviously, again, these decisions have to be made. But when it comes to certain areas of the team, it's obvious that there's going to be people that they want that kind of will fit any sort of style. And that's one of the advantages of recruiting young players, and definitely one of the reasons that will be a huge area of focus beyond trimming the wage bill. When you're talking players like Gerard Braithwaite, I don't think you can say, oh, Gerard Braithwaite would only fit in the XYZ style of team. I think he's at a point where you could fit him into almost anyone. But let's talk about the midfielders in that respect. Amadou Onana is a player that I think is very similar. Physical tools, physical floor, physical ability, incredible, quite technical for all of those abilities too. I think he could be whatever you want him to be when you're pairing him up with someone like Kobbie Mainoo. And then another player that I want to mention, I said it in a comment, I think over a week ago, that I might have something on it. But United have definitely looked at Holmond. He's a defensive midfielder at Sporting right now. They've definitely looked at him, and I think that when you're considering the possible or maybe likely departure of Casemiro and Eriksen perhaps, and the age and profiles in the midfield, two midfielders the most likely. Holmond more defensive focused, as I understand. Onana obviously could be kind of both, but I think if you were to bring in Holmond, Onana, and you have Kobbie Mainoo, you've got a mixture there that could practically do whatever you want frankly. You could even play all three of them together. Not that I'm not saying you would, but you could. And so anyway, that's another name that I would keep an eye on as we move forward towards things. And as I said, I think once these appointments are made, names will start to solidify a bit more, and those contacts will start happening even ahead of summer for recruitment. But Holman is definitely somebody I would keep an eye on as a defensive midfielder. On top of, as I've said before, Amadou Onana, Jared Braithwaite, players I think are for sure top targets. But that's just one to bear in mind. Talking injuries, obviously, very briefly, we had a more fitting team injury-wise, but, I don't think it's kind of funny, why we're winning games. Rasmus Højlund, Marcus Rashford, and Garnacho was a front three. That's the change. And if you look at all the stats, there's been good breakdowns on many places. I've done some tweets on it. There's talked about it on things. Carl Anka and Annie Mitten did a good article on it. There's not that much difference since we've been winning to before we were winning on anything except actually just scoring the goals, but overperforming a bit. The front three has done incredible, and that's why we're winning. And unfortunately, that meant there's been very little rotation. Same team selected multiple games in a row, even though it's only one game a week. And now, of course, Luke Shaw has this injury, which I talked about with Phil at length on Monday, so I don't want to go over it again. But obviously, left back is a major concern. But more concerning to me is Rasmus Højlund's injury today, because I think you could practically do whatever in the midfield and the back line, and you have a chance with that front three. It was the same versus Luton. That's what I thought we'd win. I said, I think our front three will just get the goals. And they did. They could have gotten more. Without him, I'm concerned. Because the options, it sounds like Omari Forson, perhaps. And then, or Anthony, the drop-off is massive. But it's kind of the issue with how things are going. I guess we'll see what happens. But my concern is that I don't really feel like we've been better as a team recently. I think that the front three has done really well. And I think that as soon as you take a piece of that front three out, it's going to stop working. And we're going to struggle again. I hope not. I really would like to see us keep winning and getting top 4 or top 5, I think would work. To get Champions League, it's big financially. Huge difference, and obviously I think we all would rather see Champions League next year than Europa, but yeah, I think it's going to be a struggle. I think it is going to be a struggle without Rasmus Højlund in there. If Forson plays and he plays in the middle with Garnacho and Rashford on the wings, it's kind of interesting if that happens, because you're still leaving them in areas where they can be more threatening, and maybe that'll work. Maybe that'll work better, but I guess we'll see if there's really been any progress in the team, because I've felt personally like it's been really just the front three kind of carrying things since they've come in and played. And it's date coincident with Anthony being dropped in his front three playing regularly that the wins have been happening. And a lot of the games have just been based on that. It's a huge miss. Rasmus Højlund has been spectacular over these last 7-10 games. So, yeah, I guess we'll see what happens at the weekend if we have any chance of winning. And hopefully we do. But yeah, anyway, once again, video community sponsored by SofaScore. Make sure to click the link in the description below or use the scanner over there, depending on how you're watching, to download the app. Really appreciate it. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn notifications on, and hopefully next week I'll have a little bit more insight into some of the appointments and things. I think we might see some news on Wilcox, and then perhaps on any other appointments potentially possible. And then, as I said, things will start to shore up following that as we get into March on some of these positions, names, manager, all of that. Okay? Thanks again. Talk to y'all later.